Welcome back to part B of this lecture. This is where we'll cover learning objectives 4 and 5. So let's get started. In learning objective 4, our aim is to demonstrate an understanding of key sustainability accounting analytical tools. We will cover 4 analytical tools in this part of the lecture. The first one is identifying environmental costs. Just like quality costs, environmental costs are costs that are incurred because poor environmental quality exists or may exist. The US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, defines 5 tiers of environmental costs. The first 4 are referred to as private costs, private to the company. So what are these 4 costs? The conventional costs, hidden costs, contingent costs, and relationship and image costs. So conventional costs pertains to direct costs associated with capital expenditures. So this includes the raw materials, the other operating and maintenance costs. Hidden costs, on the other hand, are those costs that may pertain to costs or activities like monitoring, reporting of environmental activities and carbon emissions. It includes the cost of searching for environmentally responsible suppliers and the ongoing cost of cleaning up, for example, contaminated land. Contingent costs are contingent liabilities that may arise from failure to, for example, clean up the contaminated sites. It may include fines or penalties, or maybe when the company is asked to pay as a result of court case. All right? Relationship and image costs, on the other hand, are the costs that are less tangible. It includes the costs and benefits that relate to consumer perceptions and the employee as well as community relations. The last type of cost is societal cost. And of course, as you can see, this is not included in the private cost, but these are costs that are borne by the society in general. So it includes, for example, the health cost for the hospitalization of people around the area, and who is paying for that hospital costs. It is either the community, the people who are hospitalized, or the taxpayers. Because in some countries like here in Australia, there are government hospitals that the people can go to and they don't need to pay for the cost of hospitalization. So that's why it's included as part of societal costs. Now, the company has the choice to either use full environmental costing or full private costing. Under full environmental costing, the assignment of all environmental costs, both the private costs, the first 4, as well as societal costs, will be included in costing their products or services. Full private costing, as the name suggests, pertains to the assignment of costs that are only pertaining to the private costs. Those are the conventional costs, the contingent costs, the hidden costs, and the relationship costs. Private costing is probably a good starting point for many entities because the societal cost is not that easy for the company to actually ascertain. And so private costs can be assigned using data created inside the entity. Now, the second analytical tool is life cycle assessment, or LCA. This is where the company identifies the environmental consequences of a product throughout its life cycle. So what they're doing is that once they have identified these costs through the entire life cycle of the product, then the company will search for opportunities to obtain environmental improvements so that they can improve their carbon footprint, for example. So when a company adopts LCA, it is important for them to know who controls the environmental cost. So, for example, who controls the environmental cost of the raw materials being bought by the company? Of course, it is controlled by the suppliers, but the company can choose which supplier they would like to deal with. And that's why there are companies that only deal with suppliers who are ISO 14,000 certified. Now, who controls the production, the packaging decisions, and all that? Well, it is the company itself. But once they have already sold their produced and packaged products, who controls what happens after the life of that product? Should that product be recycled or disposed into the landfill? Who controls that? It's the customer already. All right. So throughout the entire life cycle, a company can actually be looking at ways and means to, for example, what would be the choice of the customers, to recycle or to dispose? If the company makes their products easily recyclable, then it's likely that their customers will recycle the product rather than dispose it into the landfill. The life cycle cost assessment stages are threefold. So there are three stages. The first one is the inventory analysis. This is where the company specifies the types and the quantities of materials and energy inputs needed, as well as the resulting environmental releases in the form of solid, liquid, and gas residues. So the solid will be those that will be disposed of in the landfill. Liquid are sometimes disposed into the riverbanks and all that. And gas are those that are, for example, the carbon emission. The second stage of life cycle assessment is impact analysis. This is where the company assesses the environmental effects of competing designs, and then they provide a relative ranking of those effects. And the third stage is the improvement analysis. So why do companies conduct inventory analysis and impact analysis? In order for them to improve, all right? And that's when we enter into the third stage, improvement analysis. So the objective in improvement analysis is to reduce the environmental impacts revealed by both the inventory analysis and the impact analysis. Let's have a look at this example of life cycle cost assessment. Consider the single-use hot drink cups. Which do you think is more environmentally friendly, the paper cups or the polyfoam cups? So the questions that you might ask are, what are the materials required for each type of cups? What are the energy requirements to produce each type? What kind of effluents and emissions are produced by each? What's the recycling potential? And what are the resources required for the ultimate disposal? So here is an example of the inventory analysis. So you are provided there paper cup and polyfoam cup. The materials usage per cup in terms of the paper cup is 33 grams of wood and bark, none for polyfoam because they don't use wood and bark. Petrol is 4.1 for paper cup, 3.2 for polyfoam cup. So obviously the lower the better, right? Finished weight in grams is 10 grams for paper cup, polyfoam cup is 11.5. The utilities, the energy input, well, paper cup uses 9,000 to 12,000 kilograms of steam, whereas polyfoam cup only uses 5,000 kilograms of steam. So polyfoam cup seems to be better. So you are looking at the water effluent, the air emissions, the recycling potential, and the ultimate disposal in this inventory analysis. Now, overall, because all these comparison that we did in the inventory analysis are in different units of measurement, we have conducted the inventory analysis and you're probably more confused now as to which is more environmentally friendly. So perhaps you can go on to the next stage, and that is the impact analysis. This is where the company will assess the environmental effects of competing designs, and in order for the company to provide a relative ranking of those effects, it's important to put them in one unit of measurement. And many times the company will convert it to dollar terms so that it can be comparable. So, if for example, material usage is 0.01, 1 cent, for paper cup, and for polyfoam cup is 0.004, then you'll see, oh, it looks like polyfoam cup is cheaper in terms of material usage. You'll do the same for utilities, contaminants. So the total private costs for paper cup is 3 cents, and for polyfoam cup is only 1.2 cents. So it's cheaper in that sense. Recycling benefits, if you put that into dollar terms, it looks like 0.001 for paper cup and 0.004 for polyfoam cup. Because it's a benefit, it's not a cost, so we'll deduct it. And so it looks like for paper cup, the environmental cost per unit is 2.9 cents, whereas for polyfoam cup, it's a lot less at 0.008. So because we have put these costs and benefits into one single unit of measurement in dollar terms, we can now provide a relative ranking of those effects. All right, so we can see here that from the analysis conducted, it looks like polyfoam cup is more environmentally friendly from the impact analysis. Then we go on to improvement analysis. This is where our objective is to reduce further the environmental impacts revealed by the inventory and the impact steps. And so, if we decide that we will use polyfoam cup instead of paper cup, can we, for example, increase the ultimate disposal capability of polyfoam cup in order for it to be more environmentally friendly? That's what we're doing in improvement analysis. All right. Let's go to the third analytical tool, and this is simply the cost-benefit analysis, CBA. So here, for example, in Exhibit 17-9, we are looking at the cost of new packaging. We look at the cost and we look at the benefits. So the cost, as shown here, is an initial net outlay of $7,500. But it looks like we will be able to have cost reductions over the expected life of 4 years, and that's amounting to a benefit of $19,160. And so overall, the net benefit over the expected life is $11,660. And that looks really promising, isn't it? On top of that, there are other intangible benefits. Industry reputation, for example, customer relationship could be enhanced, meeting the obligations under the packaging covenant and avoiding future regulations, as well as reduced packaging waste in the supply chain. All these are net intangible benefit, but they can't be quantified in dollar terms. Another example of CBA is looking at the cost of recycling waste. So we can see here the costs are provided, depreciation, energy needed, labor costs, as well as the recycling sales revenue that's foregone. So it's totaling $8,343. But when we deduct the raw materials saved of $47,628 as a result of recycling the waste, we can see that the net benefits definitely outweigh the cost. By how much? $39,285 savings. Let's now move on to the fourth analytical tool, and this is activity-based costing. ABC can also be used in environmental and social cost management. So here is an example. We have a company, Melbourne Industrial Limited, that produce two types of gadgets, Celerium and Millennium. Now, MIL recently received significant criticism from environmental groups. And so the president wants to know how the company's environmental activities affect the cost of each product. So the president get the controller to assemble the data that is provided here. And the first requirement is to calculate the environmental cost per unit for each product. And it asks us which product appears to be the more environmentally harmful based on the calculations. So under activity-based costing, the first thing that we need to do is to calculate the activity rates. All right, so let's do that. How many activities do we have here? You can see that there are 4 that are given: designing process, treating residues, inspecting processes, and cleaning up lake. And they provide us with the activity cost, $81,250 for designing process, and so forth and so on. So we can easily calculate the activity rates by dividing the activity cost by the activity driver. So let's start with designing process. What do you think drives designing process? From the table here, we can see that engineering hours has to do with process design. And so all we have to do is to calculate what is the total engineering hours. So 2,500 plus 750, 3,250 engineering hours. So what we need to do now is to just divide 81,250 by the total engineering hours of 3,250 to give us the activity rate of $25 per what? Per engineering hour. So we'll do the same for treating residues. The cost is $300,000. And what do you think is the activity driver for treating residues? So we can see that kilograms of solid residues treated sounds like the driver for treating residues. So we'll just have to calculate what's the total kilograms. 15,000 plus 5,000 is 20,000. So 300,000 divided by 20,000 will give us the activity rate of $15 per kilogram of residue. So you'll do the same for inspecting process. Inspecting process is 72,000. And what drives inspecting process? The inspection hours here, environmental. So the total inspection hours is 6,000 plus 3,000, so that's 9,000. So 72,000 divided by 9,000 will give us $8 per inspection hour. And finally, cleaning up lake has a cost of 100,000 and it must be driven by the cleanup hours with a total here of 4,000 plus 1,000, 5,000. So 100,000 divided by 5,000 will give us $20 per cleanup hour. Once we have calculated the activity rates, then we can allocate the costs of each activity to the products, Celerium and Millennium. So for Celerium, how many engineering hours were dedicated to Celerium? It's 750 engineering hours as given here. All right. And so $25 times 750 will be 18,750, and that would be allocated to Celerium. You'll do the same for Millennium. How many engineering hours for Millennium is 2,500 times $25, the rate that we've calculated up here, and that would give us 62,500. You will have to do the same for treating residues. $15 times what? Well, 15,000 for Celerium and 5,000 for Millennium. So $15 times 15,000 is 225,000, and $15 times 5,000 is $75,000. I think you get the idea. So you'll do the same for inspecting processes and cleaning up lake, and you will then have to total up the costs allocated to Celerium. So in this case, the total cost allocated to Celerium is 371,750, and to Millennium, it came up to 181,500. All right. Have we completed? No, not yet, because the question says calculate the environmental cost per unit for each product per unit. So we need to divide the total environmental cost allocated to Celerium by the number of units produced for Celerium, and that is 500,000. For Millennium, it's 1 million units. All right. So we'll divide 371,750 by 500,000, and that gives us 74.35 cents unit cost for Celerium. For Millennium is 181,500 divided by 1 million, and that gives us 18.15 cents environmental cost per unit for Millennium. So, which of these two products is more environmentally harmful? So obviously, the higher the environmental cost per unit, the more harmful it is. And therefore, Celerium is more harmful compared to Millennium, thereby confirming what the president of MIL says, because GET believes that the main source of environmental problems lies with Celerium. So, in this case, we can support her belief that it is really Celerium that's more environmentally harmful. All right, let's move on to requirement number 2. Would life cycle cost assessment provide a stronger evidence for the environmental suitability of each product? And we're asked to explain. The answer would be that yes, LCA would provide a stronger evidence for the environmental sustainability. Why? Because LCA, you would recall, has 3 steps: inventory analysis, impact analysis, and improvement analysis. So of these 3 steps, the first 2, that is the inventory and impact analysis, are concerned with what? With identifying the materials and energy requirements, environmental releases, and the environmental effects of competing process and product designs over the entire life cycle of the products, not just during its production. So, a life cycle assessment would provide a more comprehensive analysis of the environmental effects compared to just calculating the environmental cost per unit. Unless, of course, that environmental cost per unit that is given is a life cycle environmental cost per unit. But in this case, it looks like it's not, because it's only focusing on these 4 processes: designing process, treating residues, inspecting process, and cleaning up of the lake. All right, let's now move on to learning objective 5. Here, we will analyze and measure the social, environmental, and financial impacts of a project or a proposal. So let's look at this particular proposal. An aluminum refinery in Gladstone is planning to implement an environmental management project. The project is to purchase the new equipment, so that's their proposal, that will lower operating costs and reduce the emissions from the refinery, which are currently spread over nearby residential districts. So we're provided with the initial outlay and the additional cost and cost savings over 5 years. And the first requirement asks us to calculate the net financial cost to the refinery of investing in the new equipment. So we will ignore the time value of money here. So the cost savings here is simply the net cost. So we have the column for additional cost and the column for cost savings. In year 0, the initial outlay is 578,000 and there are no cost savings. So the net cost is 578,000. But from years 1 to 5, there are additional costs, but there's cost savings annually of 41,000. So all we are doing is deducting the cost savings from the additional cost for each year. And you can see that the total cost over the 5-year period is $1,672,000. Let's go to requirement 2. Calculate the financial cost or benefit to the community over the 5 years. So now we are looking not at the cost from the company's perspective, but the benefit or the cost to the community over the 5 years. So it says in the last paragraph that it is estimated that each ton of emissions currently causes health costs that average $2 per annum for each of the 50,000 residents in Gladstone. So that is going to be a benefit in this case if the company purchased this new equipment. And what else did they tell us here? For each year, they told us that there is going to be a reduction in emissions in tons of airborne particles. 50 tons for each year, 1 to 5. So we can calculate the financial benefit to the community. There are 50,000 residents and the average cost is $2 per annum. So 50,000 times $2 times how many years? 5 years. Multiplied by 50 tons, because for each year there are 50 tons of reduction in emissions. And so that would give us $25 million in financial benefit to whom? To the community, not to the company. Let's go to requirement number 3. What other information might you need in order to undertake a more comprehensive analysis of this project? Well, it's important firstly to know the potential availability of government assistance. Why is that? You notice that the cost will be borne by the company, and it is quite a lot, $1,672,000. But what about the benefit? The benefit will mostly flow to the community. And so it's likely that if the company presents this to the government, they might be able to get some grants or sponsorship, given that the community's benefits would be significant. Other information that would be useful could be the potential for dormant medical conditions caused by toxic byproducts that may give rise to a class action in the future. Think back of what happened to James Hardy. Also, an investigation into and estimation of the effects of carbon tax. This is important information because, for example, here in Australia, we have had carbon tax earlier on and then it was abolished, and there was a proposal to go into an emissions trading scheme. But as of now, it's all still hanging. Also, it's important to have an investigation into the state of current technology and the technology in the pipeline. So what will happen? For example, will it be that by year 2, another new equipment that is more efficient in terms of reducing carbon emission be introduced into the market? If so, then this particular equipment may become obsolete very soon. All right. Other information such as the effect on export demand of both reducing emissions and not reducing carbon emissions will have to be taken into account, given that countries nowadays are in the process of addressing climate change. Remember that there are many companies now that only deal with ISO 14000 accredited companies. And sometimes it is an important part of being environmentally friendly to have this equipment being part of the infrastructure of the company. And finally, what's the effect on the reputation and the flow-through economic impact of voluntarily implementing an environmental management system? That is also an important information that the company would like to get hold of. All right, let's move on to the last example, the Chipelicious Incorporated. This company is a corn chips producer, and they are concerned about their ability to conserve, recycle, and dispose packaging materials. So this is an example of eco-efficiency measures that we are looking at as well. So they provide us with the partial inventory analysis of current as well as the proposed packaging for the corn chips. So we have for delivery boxes and we have the corn chips packaging bag, current as well as proposed. They also provide us more detailed analysis. But let's go to the first requirement. Using the data on delivery boxes. All right, so we'll focus on delivery boxes. How many pounds of boxes will be saved? Comparing the current and the proposed. So in the proposed, the recycling potential is high and they will be using the box 5 times before disposal. So how many pounds of boxes will be saved? Well, currently, how many pounds of boxes do we use? We are using 375 million pounds of boxes. If we're going to use it 5 times before we dispose the box, then we'll divide it by 5. And therefore, we will only need to use 75 million pounds. And so how many pounds will be saved? Well, from 375 million pounds to just 75 million pounds, that means we are saving 300 million pounds. All right, let's move on to the next. How much will be saved in dollars? Well, how much is the cost per pound for delivery boxes? It says here it's 75 cents. So we'll just multiply 300 million by 75 cents. So that gives us a significant savings of $225 million. Let's go to the next. Because of recycling, how many pounds of cardboard will be diverted from landfills? Let's look at the recycling potential here. High under the proposed. The recycling forecast, as shown here, says that 90% of delivery boxes used will be recycled. So how many pounds do we use under the proposed? Only 75 million. Multiply it by 90%, so that means we will still save another 67.5 million pounds because of recycling. That is pretty good, isn't it? So that gives us a total savings of 367.5 million pounds, because we are saving 300 million already plus the 67.5 million pounds we save from recycling. So a whopping 367.5 million pounds of boxes will be saved. And I like this next one. It says, how many trees will be saved? Remember that the boxes are being produced from the virgin raw materials of wood bark. And so we are saving the trees. And it says here, an environmental engineering estimated that saving 300 pounds of cardboard is equivalent to saving 1 tree. So if we divide 367.5 million by 300, then we will get 1,225,000 trees. Can you imagine having saved 1,225,000 trees? That could be a mountain of trees saved as a result of this new and proposed packaging system. All right, so let's go to the next part, and this is where we will be looking at the data on corn chips packaging. The first requirement asked us how many pounds of materials will be saved by reducing packaging bag weight. And there's a note there. If you're not familiar with the conversion, it says 1 pound is equivalent to 16 ounces. So how many pounds of materials will be saved by the reduction of packaging bag weight? So in the current, we are using 2 ounces. In the proposed, we will use 1.5 ounces. So there's a saving of 0.5 of an ounce. 0.5 will then have to be multiplied by the number of units that are produced. So 250 million units. So 0.5 times 250 million will give us 125 million ounces saved. So the question asks how many pounds. So we'll just divide 125 million by 16 to get 7,812,500 pounds of packaging materials saved. Let's go to the next. How much will be saved in dollars? Well, how much is the cost per ounce? It says 2.5 cents as given here. And so we multiply 125 million by 2.5 cents. And that would give us $3,125,000 of savings per year. Let's move on to the next. Now it says here, assuming that a design engineer has indicated that by reducing the packaging seal from the industry standard of 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch, an additional 5% reduction in bag packaging can be achieved. How many pounds of materials are saved? So what does this actually mean? Here is a package, all right, of chips. The normal standard is 1/2 inch, this part here. But as proposed here, if we reduce it to 1/4 inch, just this part here, all right, instead of 1/2 inch is just 1/4 inch, then an additional 5% reduction in bag packaging can be achieved. So how many pounds of materials will be saved? Well, the reduction is 0.05 or 5%, right? 5% of what? Well, the current weight is 2 ounces as given here. So 0.05 times 2 is 0.1 of an ounce. You might say, oh, that's very little anyway. But when you multiply it by 250 million units, because that's the number of bags of chips that they are producing, then that will still give us 25 million ounces saved. And so if you convert that to pounds, you divide it by 16 again, you will be able to save 1,562,500 pounds. Let's move on to the last question. How much will be saved in dollars? Well, we'll just have to multiply it again by 2.5 cents. So 0.025 times 25 million, that would give us $625,000 per year of savings. So as you can see, it is really important for companies to think of what they can do in order to not only reduce the disposal into the landfill, but also reduce the use of virgin raw materials in order to preserve our environment, the world that God has given us. And so, I'd like to close with a Bible verse found in the last book of the New Testament. We started with Genesis, the first book at the beginning of this lecture. Now, let us close by looking at a verse from Revelation. Revelation chapter 11, verse 18. This is looking at the day of judgment. It says, the nations were angry and your wrath has come. God's wrath has come. The time has come for judging and for rewarding. Your people who revere your name, both great and small. So this is the rewarding for people who revere God's name. And the other side to the reward is judgment. And for destroying those who destroy the earth. Remember that God has entrusted us this world, and while waiting for Jesus' soon return, it is our duty to take care of the environment. There's one more quote that I'd like to share with you, and this one is from the Dalai Lama. He said, it is our collective and individual responsibility to preserve and tend to the world in which we all live. Let us pray. Our gracious Father in heaven, we are so grateful to you, O Lord, for giving us this world that we live in. Father, thank you for loving each one of us, and help us, O Lord, to be mindful of what we are doing so that we can be good stewards of the things that you have provided to us. Help us to be more grateful and to remain faithful to you, O Lord, whilst we are waiting for Jesus' soon return. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Alright, well, this is it for the lecture. Don't forget to do your post-lecture required activities, and I will see you in class shortly. Bye for now.